So what we're going to start with is the rectangle masking stencil. This is the smaller of the two versions. It has that rectangle cut into it, and if you're familiar with our masking stencils, they have two etched alignment guides on them. You can also see the company name etched into the bottom left with the item number on the right. That's how you know which side is up on your stencil, if you can feel the etchings on the front of the stencil. So what we're going to do is align that cardstock from our project number 1 kit baggie. So get those pieces out. It should include 2 pieces there, a piece of sugar cube and a piece of confetti cake. We are going to take that piece of sugar cube and align it behind the stencil using those etched alignment guides to make sure that opening is perfectly centered on our cardstock layer. I've grabbed a couple of pieces of purple tape. That's going to help me if I have those ready, so I don't have to grab them off the roll when it's time. So here I have that piece of cardstock, and we're going to align that, making sure the 4 corners line up with the inside etched alignment guide. Sometimes it helps to kind of tilt this toward yourself so you can see those lines a little bit better, and then you're going to tack that down with the purple tape. Okay, then I'm going to grab my blender brush. If you haven't used your blender brushes for a while, you'll want to wake it up. I do that by just running my thumb across the bristles, just to kind of soften those bristles from any of the dried ink that might be on them. Then we're going to do our confetti cake ink on that blender brush. I want to do a dark to light effect on this, so I'm going to do more ink towards the top, pressing harder with my brush, and then pulling up on the pressure as I go downward to give it a lighter effect. So I end up with something dark at the top and lighter at the bottom. So we're going to grab the ink from our ink pad in a circular motion, and we're going to apply it starting at the top. Now a lot of times if I'm using a darker color, I will first wipe off on my placemat, but with the confetti cake it's so light that I don't find it really necessary to do that. So just depending on what color ink you're using, you might find that you want to wipe those first intense bits of color from the ink pad off on your placemat before going onto your cardstock. All right, so I'm not grabbing ink as I get towards the bottom of this stencil. I'm just using what I have in the brush because I want it to go from light to dark. And a lot of times when you're going down into the lightest color, it doesn't really look like you have anything on the paper, so you might want to peel that stencil back. Don't remove it yet, but you can peel it back, and then you can see the line here that we're getting. I might want it just a tad darker, but we do have a really nice crisp line on the bottom of that stencil there. All right, so that's finished for me, and this is what it looks like a little bit closer up, so darker to lighter at the bottom. We want to leave that stencil mask in place, and we're going to do our next step. I'm going to talk to you about how to get this splatter effect. I'm using Oreo ink, which is our black ink, for the splatters on this card. Heather's going to show you how to splatter with our sugar cube pigment ink on her card. So in order to do that, I like to use an acrylic block, and I just take my ink pad and press it down onto the acrylic block. Now another way you can do this, actually maybe more efficiently, is to use our liquid watercolor. So you can just drip the color right out onto your acrylic block instead of pressing your ink pad into the acrylic block. So that's another option if you've got the refills, or I'm sorry, the liquid watercolors that you can use. All right, you're going to need some clean water then. I have some here in one of our eyedropper bottles, but if you have just a jar of clean water, you can take that with your paintbrush and just grab some of the water with your paintbrush and then place it onto your acrylic block. I typically like to use a round paintbrush like this rather than a flathead paintbrush. I feel like it works a little bit better for the splatters. So I'm going to just take that eyedropper then, and I'm going to put 1 drop of water onto my acrylic block, and then I'm going to take my paintbrush and just spread it around, picking up the ink to make sure I get a nice dark black color. You don't want it too diluted. And then there are a couple different ways you can achieve the splatters, so I'll show you both of those. One of them is by using your finger to tap on with the paintbrush. So I'm just going to take and tap, tap, tap until I get the splatters where you want them. And this is what that looks like when you're finished. Something like that. Now I'm going to move this out of the way and show you another option for splattering. You can also take your paintbrush and flick it down across your acrylic block and into your paper. So if you do something like this, that achieves the same effect with the splatters. So a couple different options. All right, so this is what that looks like, and now we can remove that stencil mask. And you're going to want to wipe the stencil mask with a baby wipe just to get that excess ink off of it. We are going to use that on the next card. You don't need to clean it really intensely or put it with any soap and water. Just use a baby wipe to wipe around the outside and set that aside so we can use it on the next card. Okay, and then this piece we're also going to set aside, and we're going to do our stamping of the butterflies next. Here's what that card looks like again, so you have that in your visual. I did forget to mention, you guys probably know this, you receive these instructions in your kit, so you can follow along with what we're doing, but we will definitely give you all of those instructions as we're going. So you'll want to grab your MISTI next. Okay, does everybody have these 2 pieces of paper? There are 2 of the same size sugar cube cardstock pieces. They were included in your kit materials, but not inside one of the baggies. So they were just loose inside there. We're going to use these throughout the projects. We'll be using them on 3 of the cards. So you will need to use them more than once, so just kind of follow our instructions on how much of the paper to use for each project to make sure you have enough to last you through the end. So what we're going to do is die cut the butterflies that are being used on this card. And we're going to do that before we stamp them. We wanted to show you a couple of different ways to line these butterflies up. So you can obviously do the typical stamp and then die cut method, which Susan is going to do in her project. But I wanted to show you what I often do for mass producing, which is set up a negative of the die cut and then use that to stamp over and over and over. So these are the 2 dies we're looking for here in your package. They have more of the pointed wings on them as opposed to the rounded wings. There's a large one and a small one. And I'm going to place those obviously cut side down into the paper and place them a little ways apart because we do want to save space in between so we can cut these apart and use the negatives to line up the stamps. So I'll send those through. Set the rest of that paper aside then. We're going to cut it apart here in just a second. Okay, so we have here the 2 die cut positive pieces, and then we have the negative pieces. We're going to take and just roughly cut this piece off. And like Susan said, you want to save this extra piece. She's going to use this on her project that comes next. Then we're going to cut these apart down the center. So we're left with 2 negatives and 2 positives of that die cut piece. All right. So now we're going to set up those stamps in our MISTI. So you need to grab the coordinating stamps that go with those die cuts. So that will be the second one down on your panel. Everybody's panels should be arranged very similarly, but just check and make sure here. So the second one down and the third one down. These are the 2 more rounded wing butterflies that I was talking about. You can leave those behind. So I'm going to space them far enough apart so that we can use this negative die cut piece to then arrange around the outside of our stamped image. So I'll pick those up with the lid of the MISTI and stamp them back down onto the grid paper that's inside my MISTI. just like this. And then we have those two pieces that we'll take and line up, perfectly aligning that stamped image within that open die cut area. I like to tape mine down with some tape. You can use a magnet to hold it in place. I just like a little more sturdiness. And we'll do this second one here.
Taylor, I actually like to do the hinge thing with mine because then you can just pop
you
it
can
through.
just pop this up and then it'll fall through.
Either that or you can.
Yes, now I don't have to get my
Your
poker
picker
tool out.
That's a good tip.
This we're just going to put right back in like we're putting a puzzle back together, and then we're going to stamp again with the Oreo ink so that it's stamped right in the exact spot on those die cut pieces. Guys, I think I'm losing my voice. This is bad. All right. Okay, so I'm not going to punch those die cut pieces out yet, but I am going to remove these stamps, and I'm going to take the mouse pad piece that goes inside the MISTI. I'm going to place that underneath because now we're going to use clear stamps over the top of what we have here. Place that down. And then we have the clear fills for the butterfly set. And these clear fills are not meant to be absolutely perfect. They're actually meant to stamp imperfectly, so you don't have to be so concerned about getting them lined up exactly within the outlines. There should be a little bit of white space around the outside. So I like to place those over the top. And then I'll pick them up with the lid. Now my cardstock pieces are probably going to stick to the butterflies.
That's all right.
But they're in exactly the right place here, so we can just peel them off of there and stick them back in.
This is a good thing if you're mass producing. I know I said that earlier, but yeah.
Yes, it is so easy then to just die cut a bunch of white butterflies and then stamp and stamp and stamp. So we've got guava ink on the smaller butterfly. So I'm going to ink that one up. The guava ink is our coral colored ink if you don't have TE inks and you're substituting along the way. Then we have our pineapple, which is kind of a golden yellow color. I'm going to cross my fingers. I think I washed these stamps. All right, so guava on the smaller and pineapple on the larger
And drum
one.
roll.
We
Yay.
did it. We did not get an orange butterfly, so I know the stamp was clean up there. Okay, so we're done with this bottom butterfly now, and this is what Susan was talking about. It's nice to have this on a hinge, so you can just lift it up and poke that butterfly through and grab them from the bottom. Sometimes they are a little bit difficult to get out, so it's nice to have the option to just push it through. Now this guy we're not quite done with, so we're going to leave that in there. And we are going to do the kissing technique. So the kissing technique is when you use a more intricate or patterned stamp to touch onto a solid stamp, which is going to put the pattern from that stamp onto your solid, and then you can stamp it down over the top of your butterfly. So we're going to do that with these sketched lines here, and I'm going to use an acrylic block for this. I'm going to ink it up with the guava ink because guava over the pineapple is going to show up nicely for us. Okay, so we've got that stamp inked up with the guava. A couple of tips before you stamp it on the solid image here. You want to make sure you're just going down, up, and not having any shift or movement in that stamp because that's going to make your lines kind of muddy or blurry. The other tip is, as you can see in the card here, my butterfly, the sketched lines on here are diagonal on the butterfly. So depending on which way you place your stamp, You can either have diagonal lines, you can have vertical, horizontal, whatever you would like to do. I'm going to stick with the diagonal, so I'll place my stamp at a diagonal here, down, up, and then you can see if I lift this up into the camera, you can see that pattern is stamped onto my solid image. And when I close this down, right in the spot where we stamped it before, you'll see how that turns out. It's going to stick on me. All right, so here's what that butterfly looks like with the pattern stamped over it. You can do that with any number of pattern stamps that you have, as long as the pattern is small enough to fit within whatever your solid image is. I think that just adds something a little bit extra, and it's a fun thing to try. You can take those pieces out of your MISTI if you want to rip them off with a grid paper there, because we don't need them anymore. And we are going to set up the next stamp, which is going to be the trail that falls down below that larger butterfly. So I'm just placing these about on the card where I want them to be, and I'm not going to actually adhere them, but I'll use them as a place guide. All right, so you're going to take that smaller of the two fills. You have the larger one with 2 loopies, and we're going to use the smaller one with just 1 loop. Placing that about where you want to stamp it on the trail of that larger butterfly. And I still have my mouse pad, my black mouse pad in there. Somehow I got my finger in some ink. All right, so we've got the Oreo ink on that butterfly trail. Thank you. Susan brought me this. This is a lifesaver. The Mono Sand Eraser can oftentimes take ink stains off of the top of your cardstock. Now, it doesn't always work, especially if you have a big boo-boo or it's in a dark color like it is here. Take this out then. We're actually going to take out the foam piece because we're going to stamp the sentiment next, which is a rubber stamp, so you don't need that black piece in there. And we'll set these down as if they're going to be glued onto the project. I'm going to grab the Hello There stamp, sentiment here, and that's going to go right down at the bottom. Now with rubber stamps, in order to line them up, you just start by eyeballing it. You're going to pick that up with the lid of your MISTI, and then I'm going to show you close up here what you do next. So you're going to take, if I put this piece of cardstock behind, you can see a little bit better. You're going to watch that grid line that's on your lid of your MISTI, and you can see my sentiment is obviously crooked. So here's my chance to take that and straighten it out. So I want the bottom of my O and the bottom of my H to be running along this line that you see here. Then you know your sentiment is going to stamp perfectly straight on your project. And then we're going to stamp that with the Oreo ink. There she is. A lot of times I like to stamp it twice just to get a nice crisp black as well. All right, so here we have the butterflies. I've kind of pulled the wings up. I'm going to put a little bit of liquid glue. I'm using the Nuvo Deluxe adhesive. It works really well for all the things we're doing in the class. I know we've talked about a couple others. The multi-matte medium is a really good option too. Okay, so we are going to pop this up, and then our last step is going to be to add some gems to the center. To pop up the projects today, I am using our foam square roll. I love this thing. It's obviously a large roll of pre-cut foam squares. So you can just grab what you need off of here, already cut to size for you. And the other thing we've been talking about today that we like about this adhesive is the backing paper comes off really easily. I know it's frustrating when you have to struggle to get that backing paper off. So even when I had those dipped nails, it was an easy one for me to get off. Let's make sure my fold is at the top. And we're going to center that card panel popped up on the confetti cake card base. And then we'll do our rhinestones down the center of those butterflies. So I'll grab my liquid adhesive again, put some of that down the center. All right, so I've got my Embelly Jelly pick and place tool. We've talked a little bit about these today. This is the Embelly Jelly. You can grab a little bit of that jelly. It's not sticky to the touch, but it does pick up those rhinestones really well, and then you can place them down over the top of your liquid glue. Now it is nice if you let the glue dry a little bit to let it get tacky. It'll really stick to that adhesive better, and the Embelly Jelly will let it go. I know Heather was talking about the Crystal Katana, which is another pick and place tool. So the Crystal Katana is more of the Cadillac of pickup tools. This one is $30 and it works great. It's awesome. It has a placement tool on this end so you can move it around a little bit after you've placed it. And then this end is the actual pickup part. Now this one, it works equally well. It's not nearly as fancy though. It's a car that will get you around town, but you're not going to do it in amazing style. This is the Geo Prism of pickup tools.
Oh, I gotcha.
It was my first car and it felt really, really lame. All right, so we've got our gems down almost. Okay. Just press those into place and then you can fluff your butterfly wings and we're done.
Beautiful.
Whoop, whoop. First card, check.